Shirley here with Sirius Talis Moon, and the Ascendant is with my lot of divination. And I'm gonna upload a video from the election now. Ik heb geen herinnering aan what I said there. And it was during elections. So this is a disclaimer for that episode. It was on the day of the elections. Now, what I want to talk about is the coming separation in the coming 2-3 decades of Neptune and Pluto. And when the ascendant is on my lot of divination, I already see that when it comes to the classified project budget, which is the Gladio operation with the capital G, that have been accompanying us for about a century. Okay, I don't remember which. I'll upload I don't remember what I said yesterday, but I'll upload that first, and then the other one. I called it Open Diary. But here's the thing. I already begin to see Mars Uranus and post-elections. I already begin to see how there are attempts to develop, not attempts, they're beginning to develop the shielding from basically the criminal organizations that worked with Gladio operation. And this is for the reasoning of separation between whatever will be associated with Neptune, that is more surgical medicine, but also channeling, and mafia, drugs, that type of thing, and Pluto, which is psychology, science, nervous system science. So when they worked together, we had criminal organization hacking into nervous systems. Now there begin to be shielding from the radiation, the science of discernment in radiation, which is Pluto in Aquarius, and that is preparing the ground to separate from Gladio. And so basically what I'm seeing is trajectories within the classified projects to discern from criminal organizations. Now, here is the thing. I don't know why the criminal organizations became criminal organizations. In as far as the occult goes, there was a Nazi ideology. I was watching Gigi Young's perspective on that, and she's really the person that exposed me to knowing about the lower astral and the discernment. I know she talks in terms of Christ, but this is very good for the purpose of discerning the lower astral. I don't know if in Kabbalah it would be like the tree of death versus the tree of life. I don't understand in that because things predatory. Okay, so
everyone else.
I go whenever I do, whether it's esoterics or talismans or whatnot, I go with life. Okay,
hunting ground.
So I don't feed people to lower astrals or any type of thing. And again, it's not about it's not about the morality. It's about a personal choice when it comes to spirituality, in as much as I
Until now,
look
families
into
have
that.
been kept in the dark.
And
We've found almost 150 childcare
and in as
workers
far as what
accused or
I
convicted of
consider
child sexual abuse
important to have
or inappropriate
good life
conduct.
experience.
But with less than 2% of offenders
So,
convicted, over the years, many
those
thousands have got away with
trajectories
it.
that
And with access to the
beginning to
largest
show
ever database of
are
childcare
basically
files, 200,000 pages of documents previously
we see
kept
the
from
last
public
residues
view.
that we're going to see
We've
in the coming
uncovered
20
what's
years,
really been
where
going
people are
on.
going to curate themselves by psychedelics.
Lack of staffing.
By the way, what happened
It
in
is
the Nova,
a lack of regulatory
and I know the
response.
Nova,
It's
people
all
that
of
live in
these factors
Ukraine or
coming
in Maui,
together
or in Palestine
create
perhaps can.
all of
I
these
see that
gaps
Palestine is a
for
booming tech
these pedophiles to
industry,
wriggle through.
They're hunting
which is
packs.
interesting
So
to
we
see.
don't have a lone wolf. We have
but
a
we
wolf
also
in a
have to
pack,
take into
and
account
they
that
are
is
strategic.
it really an
They
alternative
are vicious.
to
and
paperclip
they
that went
supporting
all the
each
way
other
to Israel? Okay,
as they hunt.
one could consider the
psychology of
Israel
these people is to seek
technician
out
as
opportunity.
a study
Childcare
case
centres
of
represent an excellent
paperclip
opportunity for them.
making a colony
These monsters
and
are
affecting
thriving
the
in
type
these
of techie
spaces
things
because it's so easy for them
okay,
to.
that
Do you
that
think
would be
Australians have
developed.
any idea
so
how
for me,
pervasive
I
it
did not
is?
go to the high-tech
I don't think
industry
that the public has any idea how bad this situation
simply
is.
because I was a creative
I've been
person,
investigating childcare for
and
more than a year.
the hours,
and
the
some of the
working
things I've
hours
seen,
were
I'll never
kind
forget.
of immense.
Safeguards are
And
crumbling.
and
Predators
anyway,
have
if I
found
would
their
do
way in,
something, it would be
and
to
they're
develop
preying
like
on
my
our children.
own idea.
There's so many things we can't show you.
And probably
too
somewhere
graphic,
along
too
the
distressing,
developing
but
good
it's happening.
habits and
This
those
story
types
isn't
of
easy to watch, but
technologies.
it's too important
And
to
I
turn
actually
away.
began to look into that while I was looking at manifestation. So I did more or less the correct way, because anyway I would need to deal with undermining dark occult associated with technology, and that would be a challenge to, from my perspective, job satisfaction.
Ashley Griffiths is one of Australia's worst pedophiles.
Okay, because it's just the approach.
His
Now,
case lays
what
bare
I
how
see
deeply
in the
the childcare
classified
system
budget
is
project,
failing. He worked
the
undetected
Palestinians
in
might
New
be
South
rejoicing
Wales
that
and
this is the
Queensland
reasons that
childcare
Israeli
centres
veterans
for
can't
almost
get
20 years. Raping and
acknowledgement from
sexually
the state.
abusing 65
But this would also
children
be
in
why they would not be
Queensland.
able to get shilumim so easily. In
And
Israel,
we
the
reveal his
shilumim
Sydney
went
playground,
to
where he's accused of abusing
establish the
23
country,
kids.
and that should not have been on the
Ashley
budget
Griffiths,
of the
probably
people.
one of the worst cases I've
Although
worked
it
on.
was only in the 50s that they acknowledged the survivors. And with anything,
Drew
so far
Viney
so I
helped catch
predict
Griffiths.
the same trajectory for
This is the
Palestine,
first time he's talking about
unless
the
they
case.
tackle
He
all
worked
the
at the
things
AFP's National
that are
Victim
associated with
Identification Team,
Gladio,
an elite unit that works with
without
authorities
blaming a
worldwide
really
to unmask
non-existent
predators
entity, but
and
flag
identify child victims used in
when it
abuse
comes to
material.
corporation and land ownership and natural resources ownership.
He
Which
was
is why I
someone
couldn't build
who
my
I
dams
remember sitting in an
on the
interview
path
with
to
him
the
after his
to the
arrest
Dead
and
Sea,
asked him
because
outright, how many
otherwise any
children do you
person would have
think
seen me
you've
building those
abused during your
dams
time in childcare
just by
centres? And he said straight away,
less than
100 children.
800 euros a month. Would
I
have
thought he
said
was
go for it
exaggerating,
and allocate a team of
self-aggrandizing.
I don't know how many
Unfortunately,
millions to
the
help
inquiries that led
with
after that
that,
showed that he
because
wasn't
that is
exaggerating.
remineralizing for 1200 years, reforestation,
Almost all of his
housing,
victims were 2 to 3 year old girls. He's
getting
vaguely
water
charming in
from
his
the
dealings
air.
with people, but he also presents himself as someone
protecting
who genuinely
civilians, like
cares
that's
about the
something
children.
that could have been.
A laughable concept
But
to regular
then
people,
the Arava,
but on
but
some
then the
level people like
agriculture
him
of the
believe
Arava, that
that's
could
how
have
it is for
created
him.
sovereignty for the area, and prevent the floods that happen in that
Griffiths
area. But they want to
meticulously
drain the
catalogued
oil
his
in the
abuse,
worst technique
uploading
ever.
videos to
And
the
the oil
dark web.
companies know that people are
It
not going
enabled
to
police
even
to
use that
identify
oil by the time
blankets
that
in the
it's
abuse
drained,
material.
because we're moving
The
into
bedsheets
other
itself were
types of
found to be
energy.
made by a small company in southeast Queensland.
Okay,
that did
we
them
have
on
the
small
oil
orders
giants
for
building
childcare
solar
centres.
farms.
We spoke to
When
the
Saudi
provider,
Arabia
and they
doesn't
gave
need
us a
us, it
list of
doesn't need
childcare
us,
centres that
okay?
they sold the sheets to.
And it already
Viney
doesn't
started to
need
visit
us.
childcare
And one would say,
centres,
well, we also
which
don't need
opened
them.
up
Well,
his
good
eyes
morning.
to problems in
Sovereignty
the sector.
is actually something that we do need.
The childcare
And
centres
the
would swear
attempts
black
to
and blue, but
have
they would never have
kind
the
of a
opportunity to do
techie
things like that.
whatnot,
There would always be at least 2
a
people
type
on
of
when dealing with the children,
enslavement
but
are still
the
operating
videos
on
later
the
showed that he acted
classified
with complete
budget
impunity.
of the
And that's
Gladio
what
operation,
does surprise me
which
and
is about
concern
to
me, is
divide.
that the ratios aren't what they should be, especially given the amount of money that is provided to childcare centres,
And
not only by the
so-
government, by the parents who are funding the operations.
believe me, the first people who would be happy are the founders of those techie companies,
In
because
Queensland,
if they
Griffiths
have
was
to compete
sentenced to
each
life
other,
in
they
November
have to target each
2024
other.
with a 27-year non-parole period.
You say the
He's
only
yet to face
type
trial
of
in New South
regime,
Wales.
okay, digital or not, where the ruler
For legal reasons
can
and to
go
protect
about,
her
you know,
child,
when
we
they're
can't
no longer
identify this
elected,
mother.
can
But
cycle,
Griffith abused her
you know,
daughter
can
at
cycle
Explore and
home,
Develop
and even the
Camperdown in inner
representative
Sydney,
monarchy
where he worked
can
between
cycle,
2014
can ride
and
the bikes around the
2017.
block
The
without being
centre
too
is now
worried
under
about
new
being
ownership.
assassinated, is a
It's a
democratic
life sentence
representative
now
regime.
for me and
Once
for
that
her.
is not
It's always
okay,
there.
once
It's
that out
always
the
present.
window,
You
everything out the
can't
window,
fully
including the
trust.
heads
You
of
question every
the
decision you ever
leaders.
made. Did I do the right thing? For a long time, I didn't blame myself at all. I thought, well, I did what every
and
other
this is
mother does,
including
and
the
got back to
high-tech
work and put my child in care
pup that
and
we're
trusted
about to
that
see with
people were looking after
Saturn
her
and Neptune.
appropriately. But as the years have gone on, I
Again, this is
blame
why I said
myself,
plan for
and I do
sovereignty.
wish I had made
I
different
know
life
hearing
choices.
good news sometimes seems unrealistic. Now,
This mother
I'm the
had
first
no
that
idea her
sees
child had
that
been
had
abused
I have
until
Saturn
she
in the
received a
freaking
call
ninth
from the
house, okay?
police.
I'm the first that would think of good news as
And then they went
unrealistic.
through what
That being
information they
said,
had
I
compiled.
diligently
Yes,
look
that they had
into
absolutely
something
conclusive
and
evidence
see
that
certain
my daughter had been a
trajectory,
victim of
and I say,
Ashley
Falcon,
Griffith.
plan for sovereignty, because with sovereignty, and let me tell you something, when I was a
Understaffed,
child,
under-supervised centres gave him the freedom
and I
to
don't have rights for this episode, but when I was a child, my mama told me, if somebody comes to hit you, hit them 7 times worse until they don't even think to do that again. And I was extremely cautious because immediately I knew that there's a certain trajectory that I'm not interested to get into. And that is, my thought with my 22 Mars was, hey, if that attack is so much so that it threatens my life, then I should terminate. Okay? Like put an end to that. If this is about a boundary setting, that I should get a hold of my emotional state to set the boundary and transmute the energy in a way where it's clear and compassionate. Okay. Um, and so I was not listening to that advice of my parent, because something in the child self already recognized that I'm dealing with something bigger than that. And the power of structure, Saturn, um, even when I was so malefically attacked, um, that it was not just lethality, but something that is a combination of that and worse things, I looked to what is the structure behind, because and this is where Saturn can be benefic even in Aries, because it's thinking about, okay, let's say that person that attacked is off the, let's say that person is off with his head. Now what? And that's a thought experiment I did with everybody that was talking about Israel. And usually the answers that I would find is Shia versus Sunna. Okay, and it doesn't mean that that person should or shouldn't be off with their head. It just means that what would be the thing that changes everything. And in the situation we're dealing today is the classified budget. Okay, a while ago, not long ago, a person that lives in United States turned to me and says, United States is evil. I need to go back to China and so on. They're trying to target me. And I was like, okay, just another fellow American, global citizen of the world, even not American, dealing with the targeted individuals project funded by classified projects budget. Knowing that allowed me to contact the place, their residence, which has a real estate company that probably wants to have more project in the area, and request for investment options in the case that they tend to the topic of targeted individuals that risks their projects and their estate company profit by the budget of classified projects. Okay, so just taking United States evil out of the equation and looking at the structure of something allowed me to have a point of interference, because hey, that residence, that municipality, and by the way, it was in Texas. There's another guy that builds dams in Texas. That inspired my wanting to build dams around the Dead Sea. He's a double I. I don't know if he's a double I or they made him work with the symbolism of double I, but that's understanding that, hey, there are companies that are going to be affected by their tenants being targeted from the classified budget project, which, let's say you're a realtor or have a construction company or have big project. There was a big project, kind of like a 15-minute city almost, and that, that being affected would prevent people from being investors in real estate in Texas. And investors are from all over the world. I live in Israel. We have the Section 8, we had the private equity, we had all the ads, which gave us the power to request things. The the Israelis that just went for the money, they got all their estates flipped. And, I know Israelis that had their estates flipped. Section 8. And whether it was Section 8 or not, 13 estates flipped, had to sell all of them when they are in their 60s and their 70s, and that's their passive income. Okay, so this is something that I definitely learned from. And now there are the Section 8s that are becoming for purchase, which is a blessed phenomena. I don't know if it interrelates to the confiscation of the estates under the guise of wrong tenants, or the private equity that is competing. Like, I really don't know what's going on with that, but I like seeing the Section 8s going into private ownership. I just don't know if that is funded by the classified project. I do know people like Caesar Girl that are going out of income-based housing, and I love seeing that. They had their food vouchers cut off recently, and so this is something that for any investor is very interesting. And you'd be surprised where people could take a loan from the bank, put it into investment, and have that investment yielding when they have no money. And worst case scenario, they could foreclosure the house and they will lose no money in that regard if they don't rely on that as their sole income. So there are a lot of opportunities, even with one with no credit score. And so this is something that does exist, which is why I'm all for housing first, and not and abolishing the targeted individuals projects, because yes, there are a lot of opportunities, and once a person receives enough basic income from such trajectory and offers good affordable housing to people, then they can absolutely cut themselves a dividend and pay not the first installment, but buy their own house in cash which I think can be a fair way to do real estate. Okay, if you're not reliant on that passive income, okay, if you're particularly not reliant, if you close that passive income to build yourself a house, offer it an affordable rent, and worst case scenario, you sell the house on foreclosure, okay, or the bank owns the house, and so on and so forth, and you're not reliant on that income, then if it's successful, you can buy a house in cash. I do warn people about the off-grid because I saw the off-grid is being targeted massively. And here is the thing, off-grid is fantastic, but we have to tend to the on-grid problems to tackle the off-grid, okay? Because the off-grid is just going to be on-grid. Now, how does that all relate to Gladio? We're talking about the war on the resources in the soil. Okay, if I take my dams project in the Dead Sea, there are floods every year there. People die every year there. And it could be a person went to, let's say, the Dead Sea Hotel, and usually people go there for the health of their skin, which is usually a result of trauma. Then there is a flood, and they can't go out of the hotel. They can't climb up to the inner city, okay, and vice versa. People get stuck there, and when we have the dams, then the entire area is reforested. And I mean reforested. There are eucalyptus trees in Arad city, okay, 500 meters above sea. Eucalyptus were planted to dry swamps. You can still see the remnants of the sugar canes in Beersheba and in Arad that were above the camel's back. That much vegetation was there. We were taught that camel is a desert animal. That's wrong. And that was all just 100 years ago. So my project that would make sure that the air quality is still improved, okay, because we still talk about mountainous area. It would not affect, it will take from the natural climate, the natural vegetation. It would not cause excess humidity. It would remineralize the area for 12 millennia. It would prevent people dying at the floods. It would create water streams that create water sovereignty, all of those things. And I wanted to build the same routes that travelers have, but accessible with a wheelchair. So accessible also for disabled people. That project was competing with a project that wants to drain the oil from the area using the worst techniques ever, when we know that within the decade to two where they do the drilling, eventually nobody would be buying oil anymore. And it's the oil companies that are prepared for that. I'm not, how should I say that? I'm not throwing a surprise at the oil companies in and saying that it's not news. They probably are informed about energy. They are probably prepared. It's those around them that are gonna fall off like the leaves in autumn. Those people that were reliant on investing in oil and are basically funding the classified project and funded by the classified projects. Okay, when we're talking Gladio. So Gladio was the union of oil and mafia. Okay, under the guise of orthodoxy and religion, um, and powering military. Now, it's not news. United States was, along with the Mountain Rushmore, we should have a statue of a poppy flower because that's a part. Because poppy flowers are part of the founding fathers of the United States, and um, And if there was an equal of Mount Rushmore in Israel and Palestine, we would probably see familiar faces of Epstein on it, and perhaps Aleister Crowley. And so, and it's not nice to say it, but with those faces, there's another guy with a mustache, and I don't mean just Stalin. Although Stalin was a prominent figure, honored and revered in Israel, I think it was around the 50s. Um, Mind you, Russia is in the P5 because it was with the winners of the Second World War. So Stalin, but is in the P5, okay? It was his regime that got to the P5. P5 is the veto countries on military invasion in the Security Council. And people ask, how did they get Russia to get? Well, they had to back Zelensky, and and that entire situation is, yes, quite interesting when we think about the 5% being perhaps gourdily intertwined with classified projects that harms everybody in NATO, okay, from the Gen Z to the Gen Sec. So, by the way, if you've been wondering about the flag that we see in Gen Z demonstrations, that probably would be the funding, and that's the skulls and bones. So it's kind of like the Bolsheviks all over again, that they were funded by the School of Rockefeller, according to the historical heritage. There's a video I made with that reference. Okay, so that was the reference. And the thing is, what do you do when you want oil from a country? Well, you decentralize the regime that already needs decentralizing, and then you have the ability to take the oil with no war. That held for no more than 2-3 decades, until the entire thing collapsed, and finally collapsed in the 1990s. Now, when people go short on oil and they don't mind billions of dead people, they are okay with that, but they run the risk of going Al Gore his, which means that 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 it would be better for them to build a house off grid, is what I'm saying. Now, what would that upcoming separation of Saturn and of Pluto and Neptune look like? Think about two things, that oil and banking. What happens if the R&Rs divorce? We're already seeing, I know, but in this century we haven't seen Pluto and Neptune separate. So let's see if we can find other times in history where Pluto and Neptune were in the opening square. And a word of reverence for Astroseek, because this is Neptune square. Any orb. Neptune square Pluto. Aspect search engine. Neptune square Pluto. Now, are we predicted a global nuclear holocaust around the sextile? I do predict, because the classified projects budget is setting up to divide, because just like I am an astrologer, there are astrologers around those budgetings, so they know they're setting up to divide. And basically it means that there is a shielding, there are shielding programs from the targeted individuals programs, funded very likely even by those classified projects, because they begin to understand that the Plutonian powers will need to defend themselves from the mafia and the medical field again. And what does that again means? First of all, the opening square is set up to perfect in 2061, which means we do not have another Gladio century. Now, for people, it's like, 61! Yes, wait a second. Just like the bisextile has been almost a decade on and off in the water and earth trine and the fire and air, okay, expect the 2050s when Aries ingresses into Taurus, which is another megalithic event. Okay, it's a century of, if we were since the 20s, the 1920s, building an Ubermensch, a superhuman, okay, we will now see it done with Superwoman. And okay, now I know that the cloning project, whether we talk about Vogue or people talk about Khazarian mafia, well, first of all, we need to understand that the foundation of any country began with organized crime. Okay, crime, organized, government. Okay, terror, organized, army. And that gives us, within the Gladio operation, we were basically aware that when the mafia needs to govern, it needs to grant human rights. Okay, and this is how women, for example, got the right to vote, and they could tax women. But this is something that or when a guerrilla organization becomes an army, they will be litigated for war crimes. And it's basically kind of a trajectory where, in terms of extortion, there were even informants that talked about the Me Too coming from people, the discussion about Jay-Z and R. Kelly. Okay, I'm not going to address that in full, because there's something that was going on there. But the understanding that those cards were set to be used to extortion, same as the children trafficking cults, okay, they're set to be exposed. And during the Pluto and Neptune sextile, there was an agreement about the timing, Saturn, of the exposure, but now it's Saturn going through Pluto in COVID, where the entire world got to know what's energy, what's targeted individuals, what are the rituals. Okay, that could no longer be hidden, because Saturn became informed by Pluto, and Pluto transformed Saturn. Okay, this is where, after COVID, not just in terms of the medicine, but in terms of political power, people no longer believe in that, but they also see that anything that presented itself as alternative to the government, or the belief that the mafia will save people, okay, which is the Neptune rules both mafia and savior, or that the mafia will save from a corrupt government. Basically, the meme that ran around in 7th October was, you are this close to finding out that your governments worldly are basically founded by criminal organizations. And this is true. It's a truth that all of us have been dissociating. And anybody that, for example, starts a business, they start a business, there are not yet rules around that business, and then they begin to form rules around that business, and under the creation of rules, there are various interests. And here with Saturn Aries, there's going to be an attempt with the meeting of Saturn Neptune, which is where the mafia loses the grip over the rules. It tries to instill rules, but it loses the grip over the rules because it's beginning to no longer be supported by Gladio. And of course, some will try to have a legal business, okay? And okay, so going from mafia to informants to legal business. And then we are building up to several decades of growing disagreement between the Plutonian political economic and the mafiosi medical drugs, okay, which we will also see how the psychologist and the psychiatrist will begin to argue. One of the memes that I shared was, a therapist said, the people that need therapy, they usually don't come to therapy. It's their victims that come to seek help. And this is already the seed of a growing trajectory, okay? That during Gladio, and a lot of people, there are people that even got their way out of being satanically ritually abused by using psychedelics to heal from trauma. Okay, and I know at least 2 people that managed somewhat fairly well to find a house and so on, as long as they would heal with psychedelics. What happened in the Nova in Israel was interesting because there were people that were probably not recreationally using psychedelics coming to a party, and they were slaughtered in that party and ritually sacrificed, and those survivors were put in psychiatric drugs, and there was a lot of rage around that, so it created a certain trajectory around the entire health system, and at the same time, Teva Pharmaceutics, that, by the way, some people in Teva Pharmaceutics were even called Dr. Mengele's, and again, I don't blame necessarily the personnel that is usually uninformed and learns 7 years of something, and and takes a look at their existing data, not being informed of the evidence that's being destroyed in every pharmaceutical company, along with the whistleblowers. So people that don't have that on their trajectory might be surprised at being suddenly called Dr. Mengele when they go with the mockingbirds around something that has absolutely no use in the medical field, but was designed as a torture to begin with, and that is, the certain drugs that were used under the guise of psychiatry. By the way, a testimony from a person that developed frequency jammers for targeted individual was the psychiatrist had to make a U-turn from diagnosing them as psychotic when they were suffering with being targeted individual. So all of these things are jamming the classified project budget, making it very difficult for people that run organizations like NATO and Neptune will be around NATO's Rahu conjoining Aries in 15 years. This will be okay. This will be with still in the thrones of the sextile with Pluto, and it's going to be and NATO very likely is going to be, because of this adjacency to Rahu and Lilith, is going to be the topic of discussion, because people are going to ask themselves, why are some people cashing in on war? Why are civilians targeted? And I believe even the people, I think about Mark Rutte that was doing a year-long journey to bring in the 5%. When he was prime minister, he was trying to actually preserve the national budget that was confiscated from him for the sake of a certain military operation that now his head is adjacent to, what I jokingly call the Rutte gates. But it was an entire thing. And now, once the 5% need to be coming into use, basically, is basically is being. I'm not saying algorithmed, but they kind of try to algorithm him. Let's just put it that way. Whether it's from the Rutte gates, and my prediction is that with NATO, there might be those challenges around. All the while, there was a quasi, web form, underwater web form of a Cuba missile crisis that was on the low, just managed kind of effortlessly. Okay, which is yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like an Asian singing in the bathroom, and they sound like the best of pop to opera to rock singers, and they just go about doing the dishes. That's Mark Rutte doing budget, but then some people are just talented in what they do, is what I'm saying. But the thing is that they try to algorithm the guy, particularly because he's so informed of funding. um, so so I definitely see how NATO itself is dealing. The Rutte Gates is definitely associated with NATO, and if NATO was subjecting itself to be scammed by certain military operations, okay, and I'm being exceedingly tender here with the analysis, it should at least take accountability and funnel the classified project to lifelong compensation, or shilumim, for the targeted civilians and veterans. Okay? While they have to fix a 500 million euro cost of underwater. Now this is I called it cutting cords with the 1100 back then, but I did so silently. um, Now, talking about people that have the capacity to sing but weren't allowed to, Marc Dutroux. Now you think about silenced people. You think about the victims of targeted individuals, the victims of the Me Too, the victims. Marc Dutroux wanting to sing "Being Silenced" by Michel Nihoul. Now, um, upon the growing disagreement between Pluto cult and Neptune mafia, then drugs, pharmaceuticals, medicine, and mafia, drugs prescribed or not, um, we are going to definitely see attempts to find the diddlers and the Tates. And remember when Tate began to sing about the social credit score? And the growing anti-globalist tendencies alongside with the globalist tendencies. People are worried about 2030, Agenda 25, all these things. Whether they are successful or not, they are likely to fall apart within less than a couple of decades. And the people thinking to go short on it, on time, might get Al Gore hissed midway. So that's just the nature of extortion cults and treason cults. Now, another thing, I was watching Gigi Young's Occulted, and as an astrologer, I'd like to remind us that Ares, the god of war that's associated with Mars, was the god that protected women from being raped and basically unalived the rapists. People worship Ares with human sacrifice. I cannot recommend it less. Okay, and this is a century where we were and are still making experiments in praxis around spirituality and religion. Okay, remember the Sedna story. Who eventually had the powers? Not the father that trafficked his own daughter and groomed her to be trafficked so much so that there wasn't even a good man in her village that had a touch that was honoring and a consciousness and an action that was honoring. The people that try to fragment even the thing around touch. Anyway, okay. And and essentially it was when Sedna drowned and became the goddess of the underworld, that there was actually no food unless Sedna was appeased, and she's venerated as a matchmaking goddess, okay, in the sense that she's not going to be forcibly wedding anybody. And it is not about giving up relationships, but finding relationships where one is honored and free. And this is particularly regarding the sexual energy, because they were trying to hunt for a life energy. And this is as old as the Inuit. And back to the trajectory, we all came pretty much from the Inuit or from the Arctic. So this is the society that until today embodies this wisdom and those stories. And Sedna is just one goddess of a complete pantheon. Okay, but as an astrologer, I see Sedna in Gemini, Uranus going over Sedna in Gemini, everybody fighting about the Arctic. And there are technologies there, which is Gemini, rare earth minerals, and the aliens. I don't know. I have no idea what about those things. But this is where we see that it was not those who worshipped the gods that feed on life that had the powers, but actually those that contain the wisdom that is actually natural and authentic. Going back to Ares, god of war, he was the one that unalived the rapist. Why? Because Mars defends. The good use of Mars is to defend. How do you get to actually, have loving to, how do you get to relax to make love? Well, you have to create the world that defends that cozy, a sphere where one can, just relax and into their orgasmic self, and not by coping mechanisms of control. Okay, and that's something you only get with the Mars that's being used to defend those who would violate that space, which means rapists. Why do men love to protect against rapists? This is guaranteeing that they will be able to make love, and whether with men or with women. Okay, why do people try to sabotage the ability of people to make love and have happy families, happy relationship, under the guise of traditional family values? No offense to right-wing leaders here. um, no offense authentically, because there are more intricacies that people are not aware of, and I'm not going to talk about that. And this is because it's a tactic to control and divide people. One of the most successful tactics of division was around the suffragists in the United States, where white women got the right to vote several decades before melanin women, and that was aided by the white working woman wanted to have somebody to take care of the house, and that somebody, she wouldn't hire a man to do that, although some men can do chores better than women. Shout out to Atsuko, okay? I'm the man. I'm the man. That was, of course, a homage to Atsuko. But what they needed, okay, in Israeli, the word Yemenite in the, I think it was in the 40s and in the 50s, maybe even to the 60s, it meant the housekeeper. That was the Yemenite woman that was coming to basically take of the kids of the white woman. Okay, but my family was working class, so there was no Yemenite. But when my grandmother needed assistance from the insurance, and it was the public insurance, mind you, there was not anything private. Like it wasn't, we weren't elite class, just so to sagen. Then they sent a lady from the Philippines, and the term Yemenite was replaced by the term Philippine. And the Israeli guy that they tried to send was trying to basically assault me, and ran into, he almost ran into a knife, let's just put it that way, under the guise of being like my father. I'm like, I don't know how much charge does my actual father have to that type of behavior, but I wouldn't try it. And then he tried to convince the grandmom to sign documents for him, so yeah. And if you wonder, oh, you should have taken a religious person, then no, he was religious. So that, I guess, was his religion. And this was while I was living with my mom and my grandmom to help my grandmom. Okay, so basically, there were just things that physically weren't possible for my mother to do, and I needed to also be in school. And I'm not going to touch on my own neurodivergent issues. Cause that would probably, I don't know. Like I wasn't the right age to do what was supposed to be done in that regard. Okay, and I mean, how should I say that? When it comes to certain structures that had to dissolve, let's say, and I believe that they are now dissolving. Oh, how did Rahu get here? So this is going to be the 2060s, where Neptune will square Pluto. Pluto will already be in Pisces. Neptune will square, perfect its square, and it would be the water air. You think about the steam engine, okay? And you think about letting off steam from a century of Gladio. It's going to be around my ascendant. Uranus will be in Scorpio again. No, not in conjuncting. Chiron will be in Pisces again. And it begins with the nodes in Libra and Aries. So this is what we are building up towards. We're gonna feel it already from. We are already feeling that. We're feeling as we apply to the agreement between Neptune and Pluto, we are already feeling the division. And Uranus will continue kind of to move on. So they probably know that they can't get away with another NATO foundation. They were able to get away with NATO because we were expecting a century of Pluto sextile Neptune, even when Uranus is out of the equation. And they won't be able to get away. And not only they won't be able to get away, the outer planets wouldn't communicate as much. Which means that, first of all, the one world religion would go out the window. We need a lot of agreements to have a one world religion, and we actually don't, because just within 15 years, Neptune will conjoin Aries, and Pluto will be in the closing sextile. And so Pluto is closing its square with Neptune, which make me want to go back to when was Pluto opening its with Neptune. Do we have that? Oh, it opens in another window. Nice. Can we go to... How many years do I need to go back? Let's put it to the 1700s. And I'm going to go as far forward. Oh, 1820. So